The following audio recording has been designed for learning purposes only. Do not share, distribute, or provide any type of copies, or this audio lesson will not be made available to you. Good luck with today's lesson.
The technology to make this happen. Put this up. It's all appropriate sound. So, like I said, if it's hockey, you could have the crowd cheering, every time somebody takes a shot or something. I don't know, right? You come up with the idea. Again, neither one of these two should be handcrafted. You should just go out, find something that works, right? We talked about the different file types, but find something that works and apply it. Okay, does that make sense? And then the final thing, right? So here's 1, 2, 3. And this is the one that's going to make you think. I want you to, depending on what it is you're doing, right? So if it's, hockey and it's a puck, I want you to make the puck not always be there and not always at the same location, right? So right now, if you're playing that game, it's pretty predictable, even for an old guy, where that paddle needs to be to block the ball or the puck or the whatever it is, right? Does that make sense? What I want is something that's a little less predictable, right? So it might start out like this. I'm just going to draw something up, right? Right now, it might start out going like this, right? That's the way it currently is, right? What I'd like to see is maybe this thing maybe disappear for a couple of loops, a couple of cycles, and then perhaps reappear, but maybe over here. So it's not as trivial for the player. Give a little bit of a challenge to the game. Does that make sense? And there's a number of ways of making this happen. So I'd like you to get a little creative and investigate that. Right? I mean, certainly one of the ways you could do this is just turn it on and off. Right? In other words, don't make it show every time through the loop. Or you could vary the value every time through the loop. So the first time in, instead of incrementing by 1 or 2, right, it increments by perhaps more. Intermittent or change of direction or something of that ball. Okay, does that make sense? So you're going to have to look at the movement component in the class. All right, does that make sense to everybody? Questions about that? So that's the plan here. I'm going to say ball or puck movement change. Any questions about that? And it's all due Sunday night, last call. Okay? Is everybody with me here? Yes? No? Questions?
So this will be Project 2, Part 2?
Sort of, yeah. Right? I mean, this past week's assignment was to get the main in there, cut everything down to a single class, right? And get ready for this. Now we're going to take what you have as your baseline, and we're going to incorporate the rest of this into it now. So, questions? So let's talk a little bit about the Project 2 baseline, if you want to call it that. Okay? So I got a lot of emails. Oh, I don't understand what's happening here. Blah blah blah. Right. So I attempted to help people out, right, with regard to on how to sort of think about trying to resolve the issues. Right. I actually had somebody send me an email say, "You sure this code actually works?" Really? Anyway. So part one of this was to simply apply what the requirement was, right? So what was the requirement? Add a main. So nothing should be existing outside of main, right? And eliminate one of the classes, okay? So if you look at that alone, okay, first of all, what the heck? Let's call him now. Hello. Yes, it is. All right, let's see what happens. Let's see what kind of errors. Invalid syntax. Oh yeah. Maybe one of those. All right, so name your global name player is not defined. Okay, so what does that mean? Global name player is not defined. What's that mean?
When it tries to run the main, it sees player and it can't see the assignment statement where you stated what it is. So
Assignment statement where it's stated where it is.
Yes.
Okay.
So normally a main only has access to its local variables. When you call it outside of itself, it's not going to have access to all the global variables it's
To
trying
this
to find.
class guy here. So what do we got to do? What are your options?
Can you assign them before? Can you assign them outside of the main? That's what I do.
Can you? Yes. Is that the proper thing to do? No. Why?
Because everything should be in main, right?
Correct. Everything should be in main. All client stuff should be in main. If you did it, I mean, that's up to you, right? I would not recommend that. But let's make that assumption. I suspect the majority of you did that, right? You probably would have been better off saying global player and being able to handle it that way, right? But let's move this guy down from here to, let's say here. All right, we have another problem. What do we have to do? Dedent, correct. Okay, problem one sort of solved. Okay, sort of solved. I'll leave that guy alone. Okay, problem two, and this is the part that is extremely aggravating to me. The next problem. Okay, how do we eliminate one of the class instances and have it still play the same, right? So, assuming you've built these guys like this, right? If I were to turn this off, let's say this guy here to here, and then come down here and say, instead of player equals player, enemy equals player. Let's see what happens. Okay. Well, we're kind of doing something. Right? That was part one. Or we did part one. We're into part two. So the code runs, but what's the problem?
There's no second paddle.
Okay. Why is there no second paddle?
Because you eliminated all the items that would create the second paddle that were in the enemy class. You did extract.
Okay. So, one solution.
Take the information from it, create a player 2, and put that in a. Nope. Okay.
Yes.
Wouldn't the pedal be on top of the other one?
Possibly, right? Because you're reusing that same space, right? The assignment was to go to a single class for player, not a second copy of the other player. You could have left enemy then, right? So what you needed to do was look at what's different in the two classes. So what's different between player and enemy? Let's look at the constructor to begin with, right? X, comma self y equals ser wid minus 16. So that line looks pretty much the same, right? Speed, same. Pad width, pad height, 8 comma 64, 8 comma 64, right? Self score is equal to 0. It says font. Looks pretty much the same. So, from a constructor perspective, from the instance perspective, it's pretty much the same, right? We're good. We can reuse that guy. Scoring, what's that?
Difference is the movement.
Well, scoring, we're going to go one section at a time, one method at a time. Scoring, right? So we have score blitz, self.score font render, str self.score, 32 by 16. And in the case of the enemy, what do we got?
There is a screen height plus 92 for the score book.
We have a little bit of difference here, right? On the location. So the first thing that means, what does that mean? So we have a difference here. For example, this little block right here is a little bit different than score in, actually it's not, this section is not, it's just this one line, I believe, that's different on the screen lit between the first player and the second player. So the thought should be, I want to be able to identify who I am. Am I the player or am I the enemy? Right? Does that make sense? Identify who you are. That way, you can put a conditional in to this class that says, if I'm so-and-so, use this. If I'm the other player, use this. All the way down the line. That includes the movement, scoring, etc. Right? So, how do we do that? How have we done this in the past? How do you do that?
Are we going to start from scoring and work our way down?
No, just let's talk, how do you identify? How do you put something into something, in this case, in the class, to say, I'm player or I'm enemy?
Could you use a class variable to keep track of, which one you created?
Well, when you say class variable, what do you mean?
Like,
I'm sorry? Well, perhaps ultimately, but what is a class variable?
class variable would be a variable for the class itself, not for the instance of the class. So basically, you would, one thing you could do is take a class variable and have it increment in the constructor. So, it sort of keeps track of the number of classes.
Well, your definition of the class variable is correct. I applaud you for that.
Okay.
Okay. However, that's not the way, the simplest way of doing this, right? Because you're constantly, any instance or class itself will have the value you're looking at. Does that make sense? So you want to increment in the constructor. I'm instance 1, I'm instance 2, I'm instance 3, right? No, it's just, I have one instance, another instance, that's it. There's only 2 of them. Or 3, or 4, or whatever, right? The simpler way to do it is to add a member to the class that says, I'm player or I'm enemy. Give it a name. Right? Give it a name. And at that point, then you can interrogate who I am in any one of these cases. Class variables, that's fine. I don't want to know how many I have. I want to know who I am. So, for example, when you think back on the card example, we created an instance called card1 is equal to card, and then we started adding members to it, right? We had a name, we had a color, we had number of legs, etc., etc. Right? Now all I want is, who am I? I just need a name or a number or some way of identifying exactly who I am. Okay? Does that make sense? So add a member to the class definition up here. How do we do that?
Underneath the constructor.
But you want to, when you create it, you want to send that in, right? So self, comma, maybe name or ID.
Or X2.
I'm going to say ID. Sorry. Not there. Right? Up here. In my class. Right? So I'm here. ID. Right? So when I create those instances down here, right? Right? And if I had 19 players, I could just give them a number. Right? So now, when I go to look at this code, right? The minute I start doing a comparison, I can say, if I'm ID 1, here's where I want that. If I'm ID 2, or you don't even have to say if I'm ID 2, just say if I'm ID 1, I want it here. If I'm something else, I want that score blip to be at another location in the screen, period. Right? Does that make sense? And you can do that for any other parts. You need to go through the code, player class, enemy class, line by line, look what's the same, leave that alone. And anything that's different, you simply put that condition on there that says, if I'm 1, do this, if I'm else, do that. And if I had 3, you might want to put an extra condition in there, right? That says, if you're 3, put the score someplace else on the screen. Right? Does that make sense? That's the simple way of solving the problem. So, as he said, there's one line here in scoring that's slightly different, and then there's a difference here in the movement. Right? Because in one case you're using KW, KS, or S and W, and in the other case you're using what? Directional arrows. Okay? And then I would just simply have moved those pieces that are unique into that player class. And that would have solved the problem. Questions? I'm not going to change the code.
Where did you say you defined an ID? You assigned an ID?
Right in the, right where we create them, right there.
Oh, that's all.
That's all you needed to do.
Hold on.
You could have put a string in there. I just put a number in there because it's easier. It's less typing.
Hold on, but the code works like code.
Well, now you've got to change the code a little bit. You got to go and change your constructor in the player class. Right? Change your constructor so that you have this value. Right? So you got to have add another guy in here anywhere that says self.id equals ID. I don't know if I'd use ID. Call it anything you'd like, right? And that should take care of it. What's that?
No, it doesn't.
What do you mean?
So
No.
did we change the?
Constructor?
Did you add player 1 and player 2 to the bottom?
Yeah, like 1, player 2. I added that to the bottom. But you haven't changed. I mean, yeah, the code front with the ball. There's just one.
You have to move the components now.
Yeah.
You got to compare the movement code in each one, and then take that, put it under control of a conditional. If I'm 1, I want my paddle to be over here. Else, put the paddle over here. I don't care how you set it. Right? That's it. Then there's one last piece. One last piece that you have to deal with. And that's this piece here. Right? That has to do with the ball. Because it calls out this guy here. And this guy here. Right? You'll have to go in and take a look at that. So.
Yeah, I don't understand what this line of code does.
Which line of code?
So, about both of these loops, these 4 loops. For n in range of negative self.size, enemy.pad height 2. So,
Okay.
the pad height was like 64 or something.
I don't know.
So, pad height was, yeah, 64, and the width was 8.
So pad height.
So, in the range of negative 8 to 64.
That's the range that the paddle can move. Right? Well, is that what it is? So, all right. So let me ask you the question. You don't understand what's happening in the code. Now what do you do? Sitting at home, you're trying to figure out what's going on. What's the first thing you should do now? Well, you can start with that, but I would put at least a few print statements in there that says, what are the values for, in this case, n? Right? What is my value of n? And then perhaps what's the value of y? Right? So you know what those values are, and that should help you understand what's going on in the code. Not instrumenting the code, we've been dealing with this all semester long. Right? Got to go in there and put the print statements. Okay. Questions? But I would just simply compare those 2 pieces of movement code. See, zero on it. Okay? More questions? Some of you got it. Some of you got it. What? Okay?
Back to that ID, the loop for the ID 1 and ID 2. If
Where?
we're scoring,
Okay?
so since they're the same player, but just on opposite sides, so if 1 score plus equals 1, else 2 score plus equals 1.
Where are you at?
No, I'm just putting that in there for the potential loop for.
You're talking about this piece right here.
Right.
Okay? So if I'm 1, let's assume player is ID 1, you can leave this as it is. You don't even need to change this code too much. Right? You might want to change this value to represent ID. right? Take ID from a int to string, right? And strap that in there based upon who you are. Self.id.
Oh, wow. That would have been so much easier. I mean, you could go through and like hardwire everything. Make a second self.x, self.y, self-speed, everything.
You could have, but you didn't need to.
Yeah.
Okay. So I would make those repairs and then continue on, right? Put these guys in next. Questions? Okay.
What is an ID? What do you call an ID?
I just picked that out of, it's just, ID is just a variable. I could have called it name, I could have called it Frank, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and then you're just creating conditions.
Yeah, just, you could do, the simple thing would be if Frank is equal to 1, do this. If Frank is, you don't even need to put the second one, just if Frank is equal to 1, otherwise Frank is equal to 2.
Is that what you did?
Yeah, so I just did something.
Questions?
Give you the same complex of player, and then show the number of wins.
Questions? Okay. I mean, I did half the assignment for you. So, let's go back to where we left off.
The collision one, or
We were into the final.
spirits, right.
We were into the final program now. So, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, we've got our pieces here now. So, let's talk about the last stuff. All right, so it's time for us to move out of the basics section, right? And we're going to do the part that we've been missing, right? So, what are the sort of components that need to be there for a game? Okay, so, when you play a game, what do you typically see? I'm sorry? A menu. Very good. Right? So, we're missing. So, these are the sort of last gamifying items. We've got all the rest of the pieces into this thing. Right? So one of the things would be a menu. Right? The way this code's running now, it just literally drops in. Right? What else?
Credits. Like
Credit? I mean, you could have credits. I mean, that would all sort of fall under this. Right? So this would be like credits. Maybe how to play the game.
Tutorial, okay.
Something, how to play, AWS key, that kind of stuff. What else is it that we don't have? Go ahead.
If I remember correctly, you mentioned something about save function.
Well, a save function would be good, right? Right? Most of the time, the games that you play don't always start at the very beginning, right? Every time you play it. A lot of times you're able to restart where you left off.
Does that have to be a save function? It also have to be a load function.
I'm sorry?
With the save function, you also have to have a load function.
Well, yes. Save and load. Okay? So you can restart. What else? You're missing a couple more things. I'm sorry? Well, that's sort of part of this. That's still sort of part of the basics.
Pause function?
I guess. I put that under the menu thing.
Okay.
What's that last piece here?
Wait. Are we talking about the beginning of the game or are we talking about the midst of the game?
Anytime.
Oh.
What are the pieces that we're still missing to really sort of make things like a game?
Settings,
I'm sorry?
settings.
I guess. I put that over here too. What's the part that makes people want to play the game?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
What is it that sort of motivates you to want to play the game?
Goal?
Well, yes, a goal ultimately, but
A story.
story helps. Okay, so let's say there's 4 items then. How about a leaderboard?
Oh, okay.
There's also variability.
Well, that's going to come into play, but a leaderboard, right, that says, here's the current high score. Let's see if you can beat it. Right? Something, right? Typically, there might even be a list of the top 5 scores or something like that, right? But these are all sort of extra pieces, right? So we're heading into this direction now. So our last example we're going to look at doesn't necessarily have too much of a story, but I think it's got enough story behind it to really sort of get you to the point that would help motivate you. All right. So let's take a look at the last one. Right. Last one in the text, so to speak. Right. So I'm going to go out here, and I'm going to go out to invent and event with let's go out there and grab that last one. We got line 3. So here's this guy. So is that game called? Yes.
Dodger.
My friend Dodger. So let's go out and just have some fun first. Let's see what's going on. Here's a little menu, right? Right. So we have a little game over board. We have play over, or do you want to play again? We have the current score, and we also have something called top score.
Which game is that again?
Dodger. The Dodger game. This is chapter 20 or 21, I believe. Forget exactly which one. So, we'll play again, right? We're not doing too good. So what do you notice about this game?
There's a lot of different sounds that I recognize. Each one of the blocks seems to have a collision thing with you where in the game, if you hit them, things are falling at different rates. Bigger ones seem to fall slower, smaller ones seem to fall faster.
Okay. So there's a little bit of variability going on. You've got the menuing, high scores, you've got all of that stuff. You've got the makings of a game. It may not be fancy, but we've got the makings of the game. That makes sense to everybody? Yes? All right. So now, and there's a few surprises in this code as well. Let's go check it out. So let's see what we got going on here. So what do we got going on? You tell me. You should be at that point now where you can look at this code. Tell us what's going on.
Do you want us to start at like?
Yeah, pick something and start going.
Okay, well, at the very beginning, we're importing the Pygame
Okay.
class into
Okay.
the program. We're also importing into the system.
Okay.
They're not classes, are
The libraries,
they? They're libraries
right?
into.
Into the system, right? All right, keep going. Somebody.
We are defining the window width. We're defining a variable called window width and window height, text color, and we're assigning them all values
Okay. What?
as constants.
Ah, how do you know they're all constants?
It's there in caps locks. There in
Right.
caps.
They're all in caps, uppercase, right? As a matter of fact, we have a whole list of things, right? All in that form. Right? So constants, they're all uppercase. Okay. But again, there should be nothing there that's surprising, right? When you say the word constant, what does that mean?
That means it's going to be the same throughout the whole thing, it never changes.
It's been set, right? We're setting it and we're going to forget it, right? It'll run. And then what do we see? Guess what's back?
Standalone functions.
Standalone functions. Very good. So now we have one called what? Terminate. So we call that. It calls pygame.quit and it exits the code. Very nice. So we don't have to repeat anything. We just call the terminate function and it takes care of things for us given certain criteria. Right? Callable function. Does it take parameters? Or tell me about the function.
16 parameters. When it's called, it'll immediately execute the pygame.quit method and the system.exit method.
Okay. So it's just going to execute. Doesn't return anything, does nothing. Right? It's just a standalone function. Okay. Next. The next one's kind of interesting. So what's going on in this guy?
Now it's now it's waiting to see what type of button the player hits. So the first thing it determines is if while the quit function is not while true, when the person hits the quit button, that it will automatically do the terminate function and exit the game. Or if they hit the key down, or if they press a different key with the arrows, it'll escape. Or no. Sorry. It also does the same thing for whether you hit the quit button or the escape button, and it will terminate the game.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's all right. Keep going. So, what's going on in this function? What's happening? What is this an example again of? What are we taking advantage of? Key piece. I'm sorry. Okay. Okay. But more important, there's one more important thing here in this function. What's the important thing?
It's checking for events.
We're checking for events. What's an event?
There's multiple different types.
Okay.
Could be pressing a key, could be some kind of other action.
So what are we taking advantage of there?
The escape button?
No. What do we call the structure that's managing this whole thing? No.
We're taking advantage of Pygame's event handler. Right?
The event handler, the event queue. The event queue, right? So what's the event queue again?
Then
That was like a queue line that was first in, first out, last in, first out.
Here's their event handler, right? Event handler, that's the sort of layman's term for it, but it's the event queue. That's part of Pygame, which means you don't have to create it from scratch yet, right? But this thing is running how long? How often is that running, that function?
Let's see how.
Tell you what, start the game up, press one of those two keys, or do one of those two things. Let the game run for a little bit, press one of those two things.
Always.
Right. The code's executing. If you hit the escape key, what happens?
And then
It will end the game.
Right. So that function is running how long or how often?
All the time.
Permanently. As long as that code's running, that function is executing. Okay? That make sense? Yes.
just a question. So would this be running 60 times a second just like the FPS? It would
Well-
just keep checking the thing or no?
Yeah, see, you people fall into the same trap time and again. What is FPS in this case?
Frames per second.
Every time the picture is reloaded or updated.
Yeah, but okay. Let me put it to you this way. Ready? You guys got to get out of this habit. It's not good. What is Frank?
It's an integer.
It's just a variable. Just because somebody put FPS on there, right? If somebody said, I don't know, some great something, whatever it is, great band or something, and made that a variable, it doesn't really matter here. You could use that name for that band or that singer or whatever it is. Okay? FPS is nothing more than a variable in this particular case. Is there something called FPS? Yes. But not anything to do with what we're doing right here.
Isn't
Okay.
every 60 machine cycles that the display gets updated?
Well, in
Or-
this particular case, they got it set to 60.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, yeah. So whatever you set it update. Where are we at? Main clock dot tick. The
Yes.
argument for that method is, for the tick method, is how many machine cycles. Like,
So comment that line of code out and execute the program. What do you see? It's moving right along, right?
every event.
Right. All that's doing is stalling. That's your stall, right? Your loop, like we had the main clock something 0.02 at one point in the earlier examples of the code, right? That's what's happening here. Okay. The dot tick. It's a stall. But why is that in there? What's that doing? And this is a key thing that we're going to discuss as the semester kind of winds down here. Right? And somebody actually mentioned it earlier. And you're going to, if you stay in this field, you're going to be dealing with this statement, right?
Good luck with today's lesson.